Hello, and welcome to Returning to Us, a podcast that gives you strategies and tips for how to hack your brain, build and strengthen relationships, and to teach people how to recognize and neutralize their emotional states. I'll discuss emotional intelligence and regulation, how food and exercise impact the body and brain, and share lessons from my own lived experiences. I'm Lauren Spiegelmeier, the founder of the Behavior Hub, which is an organization that works to reduce the stressors of raising and educating children through a brain and biology-based lens. In these episodes, I'll share stories and strategies from my own life, work, and research, answer listener questions, and wrap it up with a try-it-at-home tip. Decades worth of information in just minutes. You ready? Hey everyone, I am here today interviewing one of my favorite humans, Matthew, who I met through Penn. So Matthew, welcome to the podcast, and a little bit about him before he introduces himself. He is a teacher and freelancer of K-12 researching, and he's currently teaching high school ESL in the Philadelphia area, working with University of Pennsylvania's Red and Blue Exchange, and also conducting research for UPenn Penn Literacy Network, which is how we connected and we met. So I'll let you share a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and then we'll ask you some good questions.
Cool. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
So my work started like way back after undergrad. It started as a teacher, and I've been in education, my whole career. And I whatever work I end up in, I approach things, I think, through the lenses of an educator and through the lenses of K-12 education mostly. So currently I teach high school ESL, and I'm at a charter school in North Philadelphia. So, and then as you said, I supplement my time with educational research, which I had at one point stopped my career to get a graduate degree in education policy. And so my big kind of two takeaways in ed policy were, number one, there's a lot of amazing work happening in ed schools. Mm-hmm. And I always see a disconnect between that work, that research, that, those discussions and what's actually happening on the ground in education.
Interesting.
And, oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, you're good. No, I said that's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, so I was super blessed to find the organization that you and I met through Penn Literacy mm-hmm. Network.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's one of the only organizations where I see good research and really, really smart, intentional work translating to actual teachers in classrooms.
Interesting.
So I was kind of hungry for this program that existed that I didn't know existed. And I was super lucky just to kind of stumble on PLN. And then this whole other side of the research that I was doing in grad school, which was just that teachers and the work that teachers do is often overlooked. And I mean, there's a lot of attention, especially like it comes in waves. There's a lot of attention to teachers' unions and mm-hmm. kind of the sillier aspects, I think, of teachers' rights, like, whether or not they have to work through their lunch break, or whether or not they get adequate healthcare, things that are not silly, not that they're trivial, mm-hmm. but that they're not really addressing the actual work that teachers do, the meat of the work, and how that work either gets better or doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I've been, again, super blessed through PLN to be able to, I think, advocate for teachers to through the research that I'm doing, to really see what teachers are thinking, what teachers are needing, and then to be able to kind of feed that information back up to Penn.
Which is awesome. It makes a great cycle of like, because as a business owner, that's my work. It's like you're trying to get your message out to people. You're trying to eventually like enroll them in what you're selling. For me, I don't feel too bad about that because I'm actually helping people, but I have to know what people need. Like if I don't talk to them and I don't have feet on the ground asking, what do you need? How am I knowing that I'm going to hit them and find them and they'll be the right people and that I'll have resources that will actually serve their needs? So it's good to hear that. I don't think we do that a lot.
Yeah.
So I am curious to know, because I don't think we've ever talked about this, like where does all this come from? Like where does your passion for all of this really come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I wanted to teach really, really early. I mean, probably my first or second year of college.
Okay.
And it was initially I went to a great school. I was in a great district as a kid. And I kind of thought all schools were great and all districts were great. And even within that, I had really awful teachers. I mean, I just never like I could count on one hand that's the amount of teachers that inspired me from kindergarten up till 12th grade.
Yeah, same.
And and so like I recognize in college, like I hate reading, I hate writing, and I hate math. And I don't know where real people really use those skills.
Yeah.
And now those are like three of my favorite things, right? And initially when I got into this idea of education, it was like all schools are great, but teachers are not inspiring. And I just want to be that inspiring teacher. That's it. And I thought that that was like very easy for me. It was like, be charismatic, connect people to content, like connect content to the world, be good.
Yeah.
And then I started to see the inequities that exist in schooling and like how there's really, I've like at this point, I kind of think of it as a tale of three cities with education.
Okay.
So, because a lot of people say, oh, it's a tale of two cities when you're talking about any,
Yeah.
kind of dynamic, right? And I actually think it's three, and it's like great schools. This is very simplistic. Great schools, terrible schools, and really, really effing incredible schools that are getting these kids, into Harvard or Yale or Princeton.
Okay.
And so I think like in the progressive model of like really well-funded private education, I think the teacher that I wanted to be exists. I think they're super inspiring teachers that are connecting kids to amazing learning opportunities. And those kids are like, ready for the Ivy Leagues and ready for amazing careers, right?
Yep.
And I think there's like schools that I went to, which I always thought of as the norm, but I'm really not sure if they are, where it's like you get a decent education, you're ready for a decent college, but you're also not inspired to be a learner. And then I think there's what I'm, labeling today as terrible schools, which are just schools where those opportunities don't exist at all. And, the more I started to see that side exists, the more my shift really focused to like, I want to be with these kids that have never, ever, ever seen a glimmer of light in their schools and their education, and be one of the people just, ideally providing them with just the opportunity of like a self-fulfillment in the end.
Yeah. I love that. I can connect to that so well. Two ways. One, you talked about like there was this thing I was seeking and I didn't have it. And I think that my role in the work that I do, like the creation of the behavior hub and even the work for Penn, was like there were in the educational system, especially, I had a lot of childhood trauma and I was never seen. And because I wasn't the one that was loud and aggressive and I was that more internalized, I always felt like no one is seeing I am struggling so hard. And then my struggles, because I'm going inward, are getting labeled as like, behind or, not being attentive. And I'm just like, no, I'm just like internally struggling, but I don't know how to say that 'cause I'm so young. So much year after year, it's like people overlooking all of that. And I thought, I'm going to go into education. I'm going to help these kids be seen and help these kids be heard. And I'm reading about this now about like inner child work and how a lot of us end up like acting out our inner child in our adulthood. So like I'm acting out the role that I never had. And it's really gratifying. It really fills that need that I didn't have and get when I was a child. So that was interesting. I think I never like heard you speak that out. And what else came up? And I was like, oh, that was a good point too. I lost it. I don't know where it went, what it was, but yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting points there. And I would say, I would guess people in education would agree, but then when you're stuck in a position or in a school, or you've always been there, you might not recognize that I know what it was. I used to have somebody in my life that would be like, you gotta let go of the bottom 10%, Lauren. You've got like your top 10%, your middle 80 and your bottom 10%. You're always trying to serve the bottom 10%. If they're not worth saving or they can't be saved. And I used to get so mad about that. And I was like, think about all the people that we know well in the world, like Gandhi and Mother Teresa, like this really didn't forget about the bottom 10%. Like I maybe realized I need some balance. I can't maybe spend all my time there because I may get drained or burnt out, but I do think that there is still purpose in serving those people. Like they're like the forgotten people. And I do think everybody is worthy and all they need is one person to inspire them to make a little shift and they can take off. So I struggle with messages like that. The people who maybe aren't as compassionate as I am.
Yeah.
No, no.
I mean, that's the tough part too, because we tend to surround, I think as educators, we tend to surround ourselves with not just educators, but
Mhm.
like-minded
Yeah,
educators.
for sure.
And so you start to think like, oh no, it's generational. Like once we get out, the boomer class of teachers and
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
that a lot of this is going to be fixed. I'm honestly not sure. Like I would love to just talk to 1,000 teachers and see how many agree with you on the like, yeah, 10% screw it. That we're going to work out.
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't know.
Well, speaking of teachers, since I'm still on the ground, but not as in it as I used to be because I'm doing more coaching. What are you seeing people struggle with right now? What are you seeing educators around you struggle with, or what are you hearing that they're struggling, especially because your work too gathers that data?
Yeah, like the big thing, I feel like initially, if you look at just the pandemic, the first few months,
Mhm.
teachers were hanging on. That it was ridiculously difficult. And like when we left school, whatever that Friday was that, specific states or districts say, okay, we're going to leave for a couple of weeks and never, it never ended up coming back. We all left like literally, if you had asked a teacher during that time, define what virtual education looks like, online education, remote education, like none of us knew. I didn't know. And I
Yeah.
followed tech trends pretty well.
Yeah.
Like we didn't, and I feel like we all felt like we were in this learning process together.
Mhm.
And even like the less tech savvy teachers were like, oh, this is what we have to do. Let's figure it out. And there was a ton of energy behind it.
Mhm.
And last year started to drain people, especially with the kind of on off policy that at least my school was going through. I
Yeah.
think it was pretty common.
Mhm.
And this year now it's like, we kind of have this joke like every Friday, like look around your room and pack up whatever you need to pack up, because you don't know if Sunday night you're going to get an email like, hey, we're shut down.
Oh, that gave me the chills. Yeah.
It's just, and it's a very weird, unstable, you just hear a lot of chat around the school of like, I don't know, we might shut down. We might shut down. And like, it was very funny. My school, which I love, we get an email every single time a kid tests positive or a teacher tests positive.
Interesting. Okay.
And it's a short email, full disclosure, 2 people tested positive this morning. We're looking into it, contact tracing. That's the whole email.
Okay.
I really like it because I'm like, I want to know that my school's on top of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And when they're showing me they're on top of it, I believe them. And I was just randomly in a friend's office, in a teacher's office, when we got one of those emails.
Mhm.
And she said, I'm so sick of this because I get anxiety every time the email comes.
Mm,
And I realized like we're internalizing this totally differently.
yeah.
And for this person, that's super triggering because either who knows, she's thinking of, now I think I might get sick because I just
Yeah.
heard that there's a case in the school. Maybe
Yep.
now I'm already starting to think of what's virtual going to look like if it happens
Yeah.
again.
Yep.
So, but that's been a huge lift on teachers. And then the upticks in crime and violence that have happened. And who knows, like I don't think we have the information right now to say what's really caused that.
Yeah.
You definitely see a correlation, but who knows?
Yeah.
But we've lost at my school, at a high school in Philly, we've lost 3 or 4 students this year to gun violence. And that's been just, devastating.
Yeah.
It's been, and again, I'm not somebody who ever has that, like, I'm afraid to check my email kind of feeling.
Mhm.
And I'm literally like dreading emails,
Yeah.
after hours, just because I'm like, what's this going to say?
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, so there's all that. And then I would say like a lot of the students that we're working with have not been in a school building in 18 months at this point. They just came back this September. So teachers are trying to navigate like the education, like the academic losses that happen over that time and how we want to push our students to make up that time. But also the really like real aspect that a ton of trauma, a ton of anxiety have come out of this. And you have people who just aren't used to being in the building.
Yep.
So it's tough. A lot of teachers are just struggling with all of that and trying to like figure out how they want to show up and who they need to be for their students right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think for anyone listening, like I talk a lot about the nervous system in my work and the brain and all these things. And what, we need to recognize is that like there's this really great graphic of the nervous system, and it has like this yellow zone, and above it is the red zone, and below it is the blue zone, and it's the nervous system. And basically that yellow zone is like, that's the good space. We want to be there. That's where like everyone's functioning well and they can focus and listen and learn and cooperate and collaborate. When you go up into the top, you're in that state of like anxiety, and young kids, it might be like anger and rage and tantrums and breakdowns. And then, you get stuck in that bottom zone for too long, and then you get into that depressive state and lack of affect and no feelings and social distancing, like not like current world's like totally isolating. And I think about how many people are in the, like, we're really in the top. There's so much anxiety right now, like kids anxiety, teachers anxiety. Like I'm just constantly hearing anxiety. Everyone's like thinking, we talk about this too in a lot of my work, is like anxiety are thoughts of the future, depression are thoughts of the past. So we get stuck in depression because we're stuck in the past, and we get stuck in anxiety because we're like, I had a conversation last night with someone who's like, oh, this thing just happened. I was like, you're making a story in your mind that you have no evidence to support, and it's not doing you well, because not only have you made the story, but now you're like making up a response to the story and how to solve the story that doesn't even exist yet. So you're layers deep in anxiety. And I said, you got to like come back to the present. Do you have any data? Do you have any information? No. So all you can do is be present. And if information comes, and you can respond to it, but you got to save the energy you're using to address that when you don't have that information. But I've now started to see people slip from that, upper threshold to the lower like, so I'm so anxious. I'm like, I'm so internal. Like I'm so overwhelmed that now I'm almost like so exhausted. I have like lack of energy, lack of emotion. I'm just shutting down. And that's a scary thing to see in people, because it obviously affects educators' ability to show up, come to work, but kids, like you're talking about this gun violence, when you are stuck in one or other zones, you have less ready access to your logic and reason. And when you don't have access to logic and reason, you make impulsive choices. And I think a lot of this gun violence and just violence in general is just like, we don't have access to our rationality to like process through or stop ourselves or, think of another solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think ideally, like, I would think when situations get like that, anxiety wise, depression wise, like ideally you have kind of a resting time where you can kind of come back to, let's call it normalcy, and I think like, in a lot of these communities, especially given what's happened over the past couple of years, there's never that regulation period, right? There's never that time to chill and kind of reassess.
Yep. I do agree. What about on the other end of the spectrum? You've got, teachers really struggling. Are you hearing stuff from parents? I mean, maybe slightly less communication with parents because you're at the high school level now, but I know like elementary level, you're like constant communication with parents, but even being around teachers who are parents, like, are you hearing any major struggles with them?
Yeah, like the one thing, and this is like I'm thankfully not a parent during this time because it seems super stressful.
Yeah.
The one like just very logistic aspect is people don't know if their kids at school tomorrow. Right. And like, how do you balance a job with that?
Right.
And that's just this almost simple thing, like, because when we think about closing a school, closing a classroom, whatever, we don't, we're thinking about so much else that we don't think about, like, what does the mom do if she has work tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. right? And then I see a lot of and this is just in general, this isn't just this week or this year or this couple of years. It's parents really not exactly knowing how to support their kids. Like I see a lot of parents who really want to academically, emotionally, whatever it is, be there for their children, and they just don't exactly have the tools to do it. Like I think there's these jokes on Facebook or Instagram where parents are complaining about Common Core math, right? This is like back in the day before this drama of COVID. And like the funny part was like, yeah, you're right. How do you help your kid do math homework if you don't know how to do it?
Right.
And if you feel like you learn math really well, why did they go and change it? Like, I understand that funny aspect of it. But I also knew like, well, if education's gonna get better, that means we're gonna do things different every generation. Like like I said, if all this stuff at ed schools is trickling into real classrooms, that means changes. But then the real side of that was like, you have parents saying, I want to help my child with their homework and I don't know how. And I see the same with like the way that we read with students and to students nowadays in schools it's not just read aloud and have the kid watch, right? And so like to train a parent to do that well so that the kid's getting engaging, helpful instruction basically at home is actually really hard. It's not an easy lift. And yeah, and I think even a parent, stay-at-home parent who didn't have a job and whose sole responsibility was to take care of the kids and make sure they're ready for school the next day, right? Like even that parent would really have trouble doing the things that an educator does in a given day in math and reading and social emotional as well.
Right.
And so I think then when you have parents working jobs or two jobs or single parent households, just situations like that, I don't really know how we make that work.
Yeah.
And, at the same time, I know that my work as a teacher is so much more valuable if the student is getting something at home as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting that comes up. When I have been at conferences lately, I've been asking people to submit questions. One, so that when I'm doing these podcast episodes, I can like answer some of those questions on here because they're really good questions. And two, to collect data, like where's everyone's heads at right now? What's everyone thinking and where they need support? And ironically, when I'm asking teachers for, what questions do you have around education right now that I can possibly answer for you? So many of them are asking about parents. And I was like, wow, in a field that already is so selfless and is completely overwhelmed, they're still thinking about other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really on board with the idea that like that partnership, that kind of triangulation between school, parents, child is so important. And as a teacher who wants to like eventually finish my work for the day, like I don't want to do the phone calls and the texts and stuff with parents, but I know it's totally essential and it really does help. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's always the question is like, the secondary question of like, how do I include parents is how do I include the parents that have this resistance to school and their exposure to school wasn't good and all that. The answer is always you got to build the relationship. Like you've got to build trust with them to shape and change their core internal beliefs that they have had inside of them for a very long time. And that takes time. And you just need to chip away at little bit by little bit. But there are some simple techniques, practices, relationship building things that you can use to connect with parents that will start to build that relationship, and then they'll trust you or begin to trust you, and then you're gonna have some of those conversations. But yeah, how do we reach them, especially with like we've got work day and things are changing and parent calls and things after work, and how do you find the time to like then also try and educate the parents or at least get them like resources? And we're so used to like, well, I'm just sending them this sheet or like I'll send them these links. I'm like, they're not excuse me, they're not looking at them. There few of them are. They're think about their inboxes are full or they've got work. Like it's got to be really motivating and really simplistic for them to be able to take it in and use it.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on like recommendations for parents or teachers, like those concerns named? Like, do you have any suggestions? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, like parent wise, the one thing I can say is really advocate for yourself and your child. And if that takes time, that I would say that's a great investment of time, even if time is scarce.
Yeah.
So I'm on the school board of a charter in South Jersey, actually in Camden.
Okay.
And at a certain point when schools were opening back up or choosing to open back up due to COVID or kind of a slightly post-COVID, uptick in schools opening, it was like probably a year ago at this time, you had this influx of teachers showing up at school board meetings to kind of protest these openings, saying we're not safe, we don't have the ventilation, whatever. And so the school board, I had been on the school board for like 2 years prior to that. I had never seen a teacher. Like school board meetings are super boring.
Mm-hmm.
The teachers we have an open door policy and nobody wanted to go. And I don't blame them, And when we started discussing opening back up, we had this influx of teachers coming in. And they would come, they would sit and listen, they would make their public comment when they were able to. And they came for like 2 or 3 months straight. And after that, every single discussion we had as a school board, we discussed How are the teachers going to react? Is this good for teachers? It's bad for teachers, whatever.
Mm.
And it was like just them being present taught us that they're present all the time. We have to think of them all the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even just like, are we going to get in trouble? It was really like, on behalf of teachers, what voice is not here today that we need to, to kind of lift up, right? And so I'm not a huge fan of like these parents going to scream and shout at the school board meetings right now. But the idea that the teacher's voice is the parent's voice is so prevalent that it's remembered, when decisions are being made, when things like that are happening. So that's one thing, is just make yourself present enough that you're not forgettable.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, really ask your kid every single day, what did you learn today? And if they really can't remember what they learned, or they don't know what they learned, like there's an issue there. Either it's a communication issue, or the teacher's not doing their job. But like, not all teachers are doing their job, and a parent that's really advocating is going to figure that out and ideally be part of the solution. So and then teacher wise, I would say, like, get to know your students and what's going on at home, because there's so many instances where a student's either not coming to school, not doing their work, or having some kind of adverse reaction, emotional reactions at school. Right. And knowing the story makes all of that 1,000 times more digestible and more kind of actionable.
I was telling people to get curious about behaviors, because we're so quick to want to just react and respond to them. And I said the other thing too is, like, I know at least in early childhood and primary school, people are like, oh, for no reason they hit, they kick. And there's never for no reason. It's always communicating something. So get curious about why this is happening. And I know Oprah and Bruce Perry have this relationship, and they talk a lot about childhood trauma. Like, think about when a child acts a certain way, especially a way that we don't like, it's asking yourself, like, what happened to that child that they would respond that way? Because biologically, we're not wired to be malicious beings. Something happened somewhere. There's stress, there's trauma, whatever. So getting curious about what might have happened to a child and inquiring more to find that out, so you have more grace and compassion and give them the need. Otherwise, we're just really, what we're doing right now is just like deepening psychological scars, like suspending kids, expelling them, kicking them out of schools. I mean, the amount of kids that are getting kicked out of preschool programs right now is unbelievable. I probably had 4 on last Monday. They're 3 and 4 years old. And then same thing, like, parents don't, like, kids are now, like, with no notice at home. Parents are trying to work. They've got a 13-year-old at home is one thing. A 3-year-old at home while you're trying to work full time is just almost impossible. And it's a lot. And I think just all of us trying to have grace and compassion for each other and understand that our roles are different and we don't really understand each other's roles very well. And that the best place to start is really just compassion and open communication.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you and I have a mutual colleague, Holly Cohen.
Yeah.
And so I was in a class with her, actually. And it was like a childhood psychology class.
Okay.
And at the time I had this, probably the most, he's the most challenging student I've had in my entire life, who, let's call him Thomas. Okay. And every week I would come to her and say, he did this and he did that and he did this and he did that. What's going on? And she, she would kind of walk me through, oh, you could try this, you could try that, And she said to me one day, I mean, this kid was outright defiant all the time, every time. And if I said it's quiet time, he was noisy. And if I said it's noisy time, he was quiet, And she said to me one day, I said something like, he doesn't care, or he doesn't want to succeed, or whatever. And she said something. She said, nobody shows up anywhere wanting to be bad at it.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter where you are. Nobody wants to be the one that's bad at it. Yeah. And something clicked, like, he's not doing this because he's like an antagonist who just wants to be awful. And somehow that was just this switch for now. Every student who I have issues with, like, ideally he or she wants to be good at this thing right now, right?
Yeah.
So what tools are missing? What's going on that's kind of prohibiting that? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of I like Ross Green. I really like Ross Green's work, and it's Ross and then Greene. I think he's Massachusetts based, and he talks a lot about I think he has a book called explosive child. So kids that are like really loud and, problem behaviors. And he talks a lot about the same thing. Like kids aren't bad kids. Kids just have a lack of skills. And what we're going to do in education, what we're going to do with these kids is we're going to fix that skill set. We're going to teach them the skills. And when they have the skills they need, then they're going to be able to show up a lot better. And I was like, I remember being really early in my career and finding him and like hearing him speak. And I was like, yes, that's the problem. These kids just don't have the skill set, and they somewhere along the line missed it or didn't get it or didn't, whatever it may be. But that's the problem. They just don't have the skills. They don't want to show up this way. They don't want to respond this way. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
No, there's a big shift. I love that though. So it's just like a question. I'm like, do I want to ask this question? Because it's such a strange time in education, but like for years I've been working like systems change. Like, how do we change the system? And the system just like exploded, imploded, like just so I guess in a way now is maybe like the best time to reset the system because it is such a disaster right now. But I mean, talk to me a little bit about what you would like to see with system change in schools. And I know I talk a lot about behavior and trauma and things like that. So certainly maybe from that aspect, but just in general, like what are some system changes you would love to see in this system?
Yeah, I had like a very interesting thought fairly recently, which is that it's possible the changes we want to be are not scalable the way that we've traditionally kind of hoped that we would see these huge, large scale transitions. So like, if you look at like Education Acts, No Child Left Behind and every student succeeds and things like that, mm-hmm. It was this idea that like the White House could make a decision and it would improve schools. Mm-hmm. And that's such a sexy, beautiful idea if it works, right? And like from a policy background, this is what drives large educational institutions, mm-hmm. is this idea that like this intervention will shift reading levels by 30%, mm-hmm. Whatever it is. And it finally occurred to me, it was actually a very weird moment. Facebook's in trouble again with whatever they do bad, right? And it occurred to me that Facebook's excuse is always like, we're just way too big to control the comments and the bad information that comes out. And I was like, yeah, you're totally right. Like, that makes sense. Like, I don't expect any one organization to filter however many million comments happen every second, right?
Yep.
And then it occurred to me, like, so this is not scalable. Like, monitoring and somewhat controlling human communication is not scalable to the size that Facebook is. So, okay, let's deal on the small level. And then something clicked, like, maybe that's exactly true with education and really social policy in general. So like, one of the few things that I liked that Trump said was, I'm going to fix the opioid crisis. I was like, wow, cool. Like a politician saying that out loud.
Yeah.
And then I was like, hold up. Like, how's the White House going to fix that? Like, it's such a small personal issue that's happening in communities and in families and to people. And yeah, you could go after the drugs, or you could go after this or that, but like, that's maybe not scalable. Like, maybe that's one social worker on one city block helping folks.
Yeah.
And it's really occurring to me that education might be really similar.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need curricula. We don't need large scale testing initiatives. Like, we need more bodies in schools who know what they're doing and are able to help individual students in somewhat of like a caseworker model.
Yeah.
And like, if every single if there were 20 students per adult and that adult's job was to monitor academics, monitor nutrition, monitor social emotional wellness, and really their job was to see this child succeed, mm-hmm. that to me seems better than any large scale, any kind of picture things that we could ever do.
Yeah. I love that. And that, I feel like it's so connected to my purpose, like with the behavior hub. I'm just like trying to work in education, trying to change all these things, trying to change the policy, like not getting anywhere. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to step outside and then create this organization that, to the best of my, and it is hard to do this. I feel you. It's like, okay, I need to teach you about nutrition and about mindset and psychology and the brain. and about movement. Those are the big three areas that I integrate into, and all of that will help kids to stay more emotionally regulated so that they can learn and just be better beings in the world. And trying to take that and take my knowledge and my decades of research and put it in a nice little package to send off to people to educate them and find a way to like scale it out so that we can reach more people faster. And you know, it's hard. It's hard to get that message out. It's hard to get it to other people that need it. It's hard to get people to buy into it because it's a shift and a change, and this is not my responsibility. It's not in my contract, or it's not, you know, in my job description. So it's tough. Education is tough and change is tough. And I read somewhere a long time ago, it was like 30 years. Education takes like 30 years to like make a big shift. And by the time that they have made that they like finally fully embrace the shift, the next shift is already here.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's so slow to change, but how do we do all these things and do them again that are sustainable? Because we are such quick fix people. And I think that's why fix the opioid problem. Yeah. No Child Left Behind. Like, this is a fix. Like, no, even my work when I do coaching with people is like, they're like, well, what kind of framework do you use? What kind of programs? Like, I more coach off the cuff, and because I don't truly believe that like sustaining lasting change is going to be like everyone gets this framework. I have a very loose and guided framework that I follow, but you know, it's really just truly hearing your problems and then solving them based on, which is not very scalable.
Yeah.
It's tough.
No, it's tough. I mean, like the shift towards data in education, in a sense, has been, I think, really good because we're viewing it as a science.
Yeah.
And, you know, like a real science has numbers but at the same time, I think it's super limiting, because it's like, I mean, we're having these discussions right now at Penn where it's like, we want to run this social emotional intervention for teachers to help with their students.
Mhm.
Can we show numbers? Can we show numbers this semester, this month, this year? And it's like, if there's no academic gains, quantifiable, provable, then how are we going to sell this thing?
Yeah, I hear you on that one. People always like,
Right?
oh, you're recording your emotional data. I was like, I'm still struggling with that. Like 10 years in,
Yeah,
it's hard to record.
it takes time.
It does take time. Yeah. And I mean, some of the best ways to measure is like measuring brain scans and showing like parts of the brain that are like less active and more. We don't have access to that. They funding to do that or permission. And it's really hard to measure that. I mean, we know scientifically there's a lot of research that backs, you know, all these practices help kids to learn and retain, but yeah, it's also not a quick fix either. Like it's these shifts in the brain take time, and then, you know, the results don't always show up right away. And there's sometimes regression, and there are other variables you can't control, like, I don't know, global pandemics and all these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to that idea of like small scale
Mhm.
intervention,
Mhm.
a lot of like a very well socially, emotionally adjusted classroom
Mhm.
feels different. And anybody who walks in would say, this feels good.
Yeah.
But that's not something you can very easily report to your district or to your superintendent or to your state, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it gets to the point where, because you hear a lot of teachers say, you just have to see this, like whatever the work I'm doing, it's going so well.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's going to come out on this state standardized test this year, but I want you to come in and see this work. You know, like that's how great things are going.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions and not as many answers as we would like to have at this point. But we're thinking about them. So that's at least a start. We're thinking about the questions. Let's shift a little bit. So talked about parents, educators, system as a whole. What about you? Like, you're in the field of education. You may not be a parent yet, or maybe not ever, but you definitely have the experience with kids. So you're feeling some level of these things, even if not like directly, like you're feeling the energy of the other people that you're around. What are some things that you do personally to help yourself stay more grounded, or to respond to and deal with some of these shifts and changes and the chaos and inconsistencies?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've done, and like you and I were talking about this earlier, even before the show, is like, I definitely allow myself in whatever area to kind of fail sometimes and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in general, I think like wanting perfection is often really good in work because it pushes you to, cross your T's and dot your I's and then double check it and triple check it. But also accepting imperfection is super important. And I would say really probably in any people-based profession, because people are people and people don't always react the way that you kind of plan them to, right?
Right.
And like, especially this past school year, or this past couple school years, where I was like, I don't really know what next week looks like, because I don't know if I'm going to be in the building, if my students will be in the building, if half of them will be here and half will be the other place. And I kind of allowed myself just to like do my best and see what happens, and wash my hands on Friday and kind of get ready for the next week kind of thing. And also, I think I've been very lucky that I tend to always geek out on some type of hobby. And like, I'm really good at finding things I think that increase flow, and just, that like, I'm not thinking about anything else because I'm in whatever this thing is. But also not really tying myself to achievement in those areas. So like as a kid, I was super into skateboarding, like super into it, but I always needed to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so I was like having fun, but also upset with myself because I was never at the level that I needed to be.
Yeah.
And I got into gardening a couple of years ago. I love it, love it, love it. But one of the first pieces of advice I got was like, you're going to lose a plant once in a while. Like it just dies overnight and you don't know what the hell you did.
Yeah.
And maybe you figure out your mistake later and maybe you don't. And that's been super like gratifying to think of that, because I've killed a bunch of really, really nice, lovely plants. And I was like, shit. And then I would see like, oh, I had one of them, like I grew kale. It was beautiful. It was almost like edible. And then this spider mite infestation came.
Oh, spider mites are the worst.
Yeah. And I was like, Matt, like you didn't know spider mites existed until it was too late. So, give yourself some grace there, right?
Yeah. They really they spread their plant. For anyone who has plants or wants to know more about plants, spider mites are the freaking works. They usually like down right where the leaves connect to the stem, and they like wrap these webs around. They suck all the water out, and they dry out the plant, and they kill it so fast. And then you like get one plant infested with them, and then like spreads across all the other plants. You have to catch it. But I will say, I have found one thing that works really well. Young Living, which is a essential oil company, sells a cleaning product called Thieves. And Thieves is like cinnamon, clove, peppermint, something else. And I don't know what made me do this, but I got a spray bottle and mixed a tiny bit of like very concentrated Thieves with water. And I doused those plants and instantly killed the spider mites. And I saved tons of plants with this Thieves water combo. There's just something, I remember reading something about like some of those like spicy elements that spider mites don't respond well to at all.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, next time you're
okay, because I got like the industrial crap at Home Depot. And then I was like, I'm not even organic now.
yeah, this would be, because I think Young Living is certified organic, and they have like Thieves like ingestible, because they have like your topical and ingestible, so that it is FDA approved. Not that I don't usually go by the FDA standard, but it is actually they're approved in Europe as well. So the standard of like being able to have those and put them on your plants and eat them is quite high.
Cool.
But fun.
Oh, and you know what? Actually, you inspired one of my what would we call it? My forced mindfulness practices.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, so because like full disclosure, I'm not currently, one day I think I could be, but I'm not currently really good at meditating.
Yeah.
Like I'm not good at intentional breath and cognizance of it, which is why I've shifted to like activities that kind of force it in a way. But you had said once that if a student or like a classroom is anxious or high strung or whatever, any water is good, like viewing water, or right. So I have a lovely pet turtle. I've had him for years. And ever since you said that, when I'm stressed or anything, I just go and stare at his tank and him. And like everything happens a little bit slower because he's underwater, right? There's bubbles everywhere. And it's been super helpful, actually.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that you remembered that and that stuck out. Yeah, it's one I bring up a lot because it's pretty easy. I mean, not everyone has a turtle maybe, but people have access to like drinking water, or, you know, you can turn on like a waterfall. So, that's a good one. Yeah, I love that. There's so many good ways to, because you're like, oh, mindfulness meditation, like, you know, it's a hot topic right now, but also like, I'm not very good. Like, there's so many ways to practice mindfulness that are so simple. I mean, that, and we talk about for, like, young kids, and like, I love to do like a blindfold taste test. So you like blindfold the kiddo, and like maybe a new food, maybe not, but you go through these steps of like, you touch it and then you smell it, and then you like lick it, and then you take a little bite of it, and then you try and figure out what it is, and just like going through those sensory oriented steps. And it's fun because it's gamified with the blindfold and trying to guess what it is. It's a mindfulness activity. So there are
Yeah.
lots of ways to do that.
Yeah. And especially with the little ones, I love tricking them into mindfulness, you know, where you're like, you're about to meditate and you don't even know it.
Yeah. So many health benefits to that, and slowing down. Yeah, I think especially right now with the world and the state that we have talked about it, education, parenting, more so than ever with the anxiety and the depression being so high, more of those things, like as much as we possibly can. And I think too, you had a great point of like, I like these hobbies, and these hobbies put me to flow. And for those of you who don't know about flow, like it basically just, it's a state of like presence, like total presence, like you're just fully in that moment. And it's really good for the brain and really good for your nervous system and getting back into that optimal zone. So the one thing that I really am working on hard, because I'm like, oh, these problems, I have so many problems, and I can find myself like just working and working and working and taking on new projects, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, I have so much going on, it's kind of overwhelming. Is balancing with more play based. So like you're like my gardening and some of these things, I'm trying to integrate a lot more like play based things. Like someone's like, oh, I'm gonna play in this pickleball league, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna come play with you. Like I gotta, it doesn't need to be like sports play. I mean, play can be all kinds of different things. And I know one thing that I want to go into with you is Capoeira. And that, because in a way that is a form of play as well. And I'm curious to know too, like what are fun things you do? You've got like gardening, and used to be skateboarding, but anything else too that's kind of in that genre?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the backstory. I did yoga for years,
Okay.
and it was like this really like badass. It was called Ashtanga yoga,
Okay.
which is like the most like macho, like
It sounds macho.
Ashtanga. I don't know the word for the practitioners, but these folks tend to be, it's a lot of males, it's a lot of like buff kind of males.
Okay.
And it's a lot of the time associated with like, I don't know, like clean living and protein shakes and stuff like that. It's like,
Okay.
and it was cool because it was very like acrobatic. Like a lot of the poses were like weird handstands where you'd have one foot up. It like looked cool when it was, you know, when you were doing it well.
Yeah.
And I was really into that. And one day it was like I think Tuesdays and Thursdays were yoga day, and it was a Thursday, and I was like I was like, damn it, today's yoga day. And something clicked. I've been doing this for years, and I realized I actually don't enjoy yoga time.
Yeah. It's really
Like, you know, I get dressed for it, I go to the place and everything, and I like the fact that I did it, but during yoga, I'm not like smiling and I'm not laughing and I'm not happy to be there. And it was nuts to me that I had let it go that long
Yeah.
without even being mindful of the fact that I don't really like it.
Yeah.
Right. And I had this, at the time I was teaching little kids, like kindergarten, first and second, and I would like watch them at recess, and I was like, that's fun. And I go to yoga, and those things aren't even slightly connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I started like reevaluating all the things that I think I do for fun. Like I go to dinner parties and I go to whatever, like museum openings, and I was like, that's not fun. Like it's somewhat enjoyable somehow, right? But I'm not like giddy and enjoying it. And so here, okay, so you've been asking me questions, right? Here's my question for you. And I ask this of everybody once we get into a good conversation. How often do you have fun? Like, wow, this is fun. Like I'm on a water slide type fun.
Yeah. Not frequently enough. And I had to laugh because like yesterday I had a conversation with like my therapist coach. I was talking to him like, I just so many projects going on. And I'm like, wow, this week has been exhausting. And he's like, Lauren, where are your like refreshing, replenishing, acting like not like the yoga stuff. Like where are you going that like you are just like smiling, laughing? And I was like, oh no. Yeah, but you get so busy with life that you forget about those things. And it's been coming up a lot lately. So I know the universe is like sending me signs of like, find the play, find the, fun, find the laughter. So find the people that bring those things too. So to answer your question, no, not not a lot.
Yeah.
The camp helps a little bit right now. The place I'm staying is got some people who are really down to earth and really funny people. So I think for me right now, it's just like finding and being around those people that make me laugh. I mean, I'm laughing a lot with those people, but definitely need more for sure.
Yeah. It's like, and like talk to most people, most adults, and it takes them a minute because like kind of like your therapist coach said, like, well, that's not fun. Like you're saying a thing that you do for recreation, right?
Yeah.
Most people I talk to are like, I don't know, you know? Um, but so I decided, at this point, like I'm on the quest for fun and I will not stop. I will not choose a new activity until it's fun, right?
Yeah.
And so I ended up finding capoeira, which here's my like very brief intro because nobody really knows what it is.
I was like, you're going to need to talk about what this is.
Okay, so capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art that was initially designed as a way for enslaved people in Brazil to practice for some type of revolution. So like a combat sport without demonstrating that they were actually training for combat. So the way that this was done was that they disguised this fight or this martial art as a dance in order, to kind of fool like the slave master, whoever it was, when he came around to say, oh, look, no, we're just dancing. We're just doing our music thing. So, so there's dance involved, there's fighting involved, there's music involved, there's group singing involved. Okay, there's community involved. I could go on. But the more and more and more that I find out about like the tenets of real happiness or mindfulness or any of that, I kind of see it exemplified here. And it's been like legitimately like smiling, laughing, giggling, fun anytime I've ever done it or whoever I've done it with. And it's super interesting because like choral, like there's some type of studies that show that choral singing improves community and improves like a sense of happiness and togetherness.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you know way more about this than me.
Maybe not.
There's this idea that singing controls breathing, which is like the first thing you learn about mindfulness or just kind of any kind of relief from anxiety, right? And then there's obviously like cardio, which regulates and controls the breathing.
Yeah.
And it's been super, super, super amazing for me. So, and again, not only is it fun, but it's like I'm always interested in like any type of activity where your mindset before you do that thing and after you do the thing are completely changed.
Yep.
Right. So like I love jumping into a swimming pool just because I know like I'm going to be kind of a different person when I jump out. Right.
Yep.
And this is very similar. Like you're never really the same person, at 5:30 when you show up as you are at like 7:30 when you go home that day.
Yeah, I do agree. That's such a beautiful point. And I am like hearing you talk about all the aspects of it, of the program, and they're all like they hit all the regulatory things. So like, yeah, like you said, like people feeling anxious, depression, like all these, like it like resets your system. Like it's good to have like reset, like breathing, but it only hits the breathing. Like you have the breathing, you have the movement, you have the community, like all of that's going to help like intensify the regulation, which is really powerful. I think we're finding that we're needing that. Like people are sharing too, like my meditation that I used to do isn't keeping me as grounded, or my mindfulness activity or whatever it is. I'm like, yeah, because it's the world is more intense now. So we need to like almost like pack on the bunches and, something like that hits all those different areas. But yes, I think the point being too is like when your body is resistant to something, like yours was to yoga and mine was to like certain things, like there was a point in which I loved rock climbing, but I started to have like resistance around going like, it's like rock climbing group tonight. That's a message. And if you're not enjoying it, stop it. And if you're like trying to get into a workout routine and you're going somewhere working with someone, it doesn't feel good. Like you don't need to keep doing it. Find what works for you, try something else, find what makes you feel happy. Like it's going to internally work against you if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very weird. I mean, I think a lot of folks, whether it's healthy eating, whether it's healthy living, whatever, are like doing things like you're saying, like totally against their actual kind of chi.
Yeah.
And they just think like, I don't know, it's yoga night. Like it's yoga. Like everybody likes yoga. I'm sure I like yoga, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Awareness, play, fun, find the things that replenish you, make you laugh, smile. For sure, I think that's a great message. So, I know that you kind of probably geek out on this as much as I do, but like podcasts and books and recommendations, like constantly, like I'm speaking and I'm like, thoughts are coming up and people want more resources. Oh, there's this book and there's that book and there's this podcast. I'm like, yeah. So anything right now that you have been tuned into, and it can be related to what we just talked about or anything at all that we talked about, or just anything in general that you think would be good for parents or educators to tune into.
Yeah. So I'm a really big fan of the Have You Heard podcast
Okay.
for education policy related stuff.
Okay.
So it's called Have You Heard? And any big topic that's like hitting the news education wise, they will cover it. And I don't agree with them 100%. It's two folks who have a ton of like policy historical background in education. I would say 30% of the time I actually don't side with them on whatever they discuss.
Okay.
But they're like bringing up these issues that even as an educator, even somebody who follows this stuff, I find myself saying like, wait, what's the deal? Like, I thought I knew this thing, but I don't. They're going to explore it and then like help me explore it.
Okay.
So that's one for sure. For mindfulness, I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Harris at all.
The name sounds familiar.
He's like a very interesting dude. He has a very potentially I guess disruptive type podcast. Like a lot of his political thoughts are kind of out there and kind of turn a lot of people off.
Okay.
But he also has this mindfulness podcast, which I find I connect with it very well as somebody who enjoys mindfulness, but I'm like very turned off by kind of woo-woo kind of stuff. And he's very good at like putting mindfulness practices into language that like the average human can digest and understand and kind of get with.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I think, what's it called? Waking Up with Sam Harris.
Okay. That sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be my second. And then I had another one. What was I going to say? Oh, empathy wise, I'm trying to get away from like politics. Yeah. The Moth and This American Life are my go-tos because they're so good at showing stories that I wouldn't have understood otherwise or heard otherwise.
Okay.
So from like an empathy perspective, just like getting to know people and stories that I just don't know otherwise, and like getting into somebody's head, those are my two faves. Okay. So that would be that. I had books and then I totally forgot. I like prepared for this question. What was I going to say? Oh, yes, I have two really good book recommendations.
Okay, I'm here for it.
Okay. I really think to understand the educational experience and any educational issues happening in America, you must understand the Black experience to an extent in America. I think it's such a huge story in terms of like how education has turned out this way.
Yeah.
So Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Okay.
Is an amazing book. He's an amazing storyteller. And he does this, he's so good at connecting his life to the more like, I guess, political aspects we think about with race in this country right now. And like, there's a lot of like, the narrative on race, I hear a lot of people pushing back on it for whatever reason. And it's really hard to push back on his personal story or anyone's personal story.
Okay.
And he's good at connecting the two.
Okay.
And this last one's a graphic novel, which you'll literally read in like 2 days.
Okay.
It's called Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun.
Interesting. That one's going to get a lot of people's attention.
And it's by a gentleman named Jeff Canada, who founded the Harlem Children's Zone in New York. And he was like on the forefront of like what we call now wraparound services and like kind of high performing charter networks. And he wrote this incredible book where anybody who's dealing with students or anybody who's working with students or young people or really anybody and they're really confused by the emotional responses that these people have to each other sometimes. I don't know if I'm being too vague here.
Yeah.
I started out in like a high needs neighborhood and a high needs school, and my students were fighting every single day with each other. And I walked home every day like, what the hell? Like, why do they fight so much? And this book just completely shifted how I kind of started to internalize the community where I was working.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think would be good for a lot of people to read, even if you're not in or near. I think that very much probably relates to my work in Baltimore, and would be good for people to have that understanding and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so you got 5 good recommendations, and all of those, for those of you listening, will go in the show notes. So if you miss them when we were talking, they will be listed for you all to go check out and be linked. So there's one more area I want to kind of dig into, and I was going to ask you like anything else to talk about, but I'm going to bring this one to the forefront. And then if there's anything else that you want to talk about after this, we can certainly go into it. But cognitive empathy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's a topic you kind of threw at me. I was like, ooh, I want to talk about that one. I wanted to talk about it first, but I thought we'll save it. We'll leave it for the end.
Yes. Okay. So I forget who coined the term, or who introduced me to the term, because it's something once in a while you realize like there's a word for something you've already been considering, right?
Yes, 100%.
There's a theory behind it, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as a society, we've done a great job in the past 5-ish years, let's say, of bringing the word empathy to the forefront and like discussing it and knowing it as a concept where maybe it wasn't with, my parents' generation or something. Yep. And I think a lot of us, people who intentionally do this work, have gotten like pretty good at realizing there's like more than one experience at any given time, and how do you deal with that from an empathetic perspective.
Yep.
And something I'm noticing in at least the last 5 years is a decline in cognitive empathy, which I think of like if you think of empathy as like, I could see how somebody felt that way, right? Which is like really easy, like my best friend's pregnant and I kind of don't care that she's pregnant, but I know she's excited about it. And I can see how she feels excited, right? That's super easy. If you shift the language and say, I can see how somebody thinks that, it actually becomes really hard. So like, for example, the most infuriated I've been with current events lately is this like Texas abortion ban, right? I think is ridiculous. I don't want to get too political, but I'm super pissed off that it happened. And I have to say, I can see how one thinks abortion is murder. I have to be able to have that conversation in my head just to see like what the outcome would be.
Yeah.
January 6th, hello, that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I have to see how one might think the election was stolen. And like, what does that look like from their reaction then?
Yeah.
So that's like my little sales pitch, I think, for cognitive empathy. So the final little like side project I'm doing right now is with an organization called the Red and Blue Exchange through University of Pennsylvania as well. And so this started like 4-ish years ago, right before the Trump-Hillary election.
Okay.
And obviously, like, as you can imagine, Penn was like up in arms about like, Trump's crazy, he's a monster, blah, blah, blah. And how could anybody think that he's the right candidate? How could anybody think that? That's impossible. So we took a trip. We had like 50-ish Penn students. We took a trip to a college called Cairn College in like the suburbs of Philly.
Okay.
A Christian college. And we sat like banquet style. And it was like 2 like bleeding heart liberal Penn students and 2 of these Christian college students at each table. And we just started talking it out. And my job was not to convince them of anything. My job was to figure out what they thought.
Yeah.
And vice versa. They weren't going to convince me to vote Trump, but they would, right? And it was like mind-blowing to talk to these people, because none of them said, I'm super racist. Like, that didn't come up.
Yeah.
And nobody said, I just want to take healthcare from poor people. Like, that didn't come up, right?
Yeah.
So to hear what they said and what they thought and why they made the decisions they made was phenomenal. And like, the guy at my table was like, I just think abortion's murder. Like there's no other way to put it. I just think it's murder. And it's like nuts to me to vote for somebody who would support that, right? And then I was able to share what I thought, and so, yeah, the more and more I just see politically, like things getting really icky.
Yeah.
And I just see people fighting where I'm like, for real? Like my 70-year-old mother is fighting with her 70-year-old old best friend because they voted for somebody different. And like, they're both really, really tied to their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs. But is that increasing happiness? And is that, is my mom on Facebook going to convince her old bestie to vote somebody different or to not support this or that, right? So that's kind of where cognitive empathy comes in. And it's really, 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 really hard work.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
When you take an issue where you're like, my heart, not my brain, like my heart knows that this is the decision that needs to be made.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I'm definitely curious, like from your background, like, how you see this and how you see it being. I'm just curious about what
I love this because I think part of like what's so hard with empathy is like, I was teaching like sympathy is I feel for you and empathy is like I feel with you. And I think when you're trying to have empathy for people who have very different beliefs from you, when you hear them, it almost feels like you're adopting them. Like it's hard, but I forget what statement or phrase you use, but something like, I could see how, or like, I don't remember what the phrase was.
One would think that.
Yeah, but it like removes you from like the adoption of their beliefs. Like it like pulls you out and you're like, okay, I'm looking at them from like up here instead of like right here where I feel like I'm like taking on their beliefs. And I love that like removal of self from the moment to be able to see someone else's perspective. I think it's awesome. I love it. And I think too, like I haven't actually heard the term. So I was like, what is this? I'm eager to dig in. And it makes sense though, because that perspective, that technique, like you have to be in your logic brain to be able to do that. And I think sometimes empathetically, like we're stuck in our emotional brain. And that's why the responses are like, no, I don't believe, because you're stuck in your emotional brain. But that takes like a higher up approach from the rational, logical brain of like, I'm going to step out and think about this and understand someone's perspective. Wow, that's so interesting. It took me like you're describing that took me right back to Africa. I taught in Africa for like 3 months back in 2010. And I took a gender study class at the university with professors, 2 female professors, while I was teaching and doing other stuff there. And we had this one class where she had the males on one side of the room and the females on the other side of the room. And our small group was mostly female, but she had like the university. So we sat with the female university side and then talked to the males. And there was this discussion back and forth about like the only topic that I recall and I remember, I was like, this really say it was like dress. And I remember like in our preparation to go there, like we had the school, like we'd wear skirts that were like longer than your knees. Like there were all these regulations about how to dress. And no one explained why that was. And then we had this discussion in the gender study class, and the males were like, because there was like a law, or they were putting laws in place that they said if a female wears a provocative outfit, especially like something shorter than the knees, and they get raped, that the male should not be held accountable.
Wow.
And I remember being like, what? Hold on. Did anyone else just hear that? Like, this is 2010. Like, are you kidding me? What? And I couldn't empathize. I was like, this is so screwed up. Like these people are what? Like I couldn't process, but I'm like, in that moment, if I could have just like step out, come above, like, let me understand why someone could think that way. It would have been a much more fruitful conversation, because that conversation was just then like it with the women, just like it was elevated, heated, and it's a tough topic, but I do love that thought.
Well, so your story is super interesting, because this is how I first started to play with this idea. I was teaching in an international school in San Francisco when gay marriage passed, when it became law.
Okay.
And we were flipping out. Okay, this is San Francisco, let alone, but we were like so like, thank God, like we're a civilized country finally, right?
Yeah.
And I had Italian students, I had German students, I had Dutch students. Everybody was like, jumping for joy. And I had these 2 students from Saudi Arabia who were lovely, lovely, wonderful gentlemen. They were just super sweet guys. They were super generous. They were really, before this moment, I loved these guys. And when we found that it had become law, they were livid.
Huh.
Like, so clearly, so uncomfortable and so pissed off. And I had to, like, in a non-judgmental way, because when you do international ed, like, that's a kind of the first skill you learn is like, I'm mixing like 15 cultures in this room. Like, I have to be the
Yep.
peacekeeper a lot of the time. And I said, like, can you guys, like, in a nice way, can you explain why you're upset? Like, I just don't. And this was their example. They said, if we passed a law that said like 8-year-olds could marry adults, how would you feel? I was like, oh, I guess I wouldn't like that. And they said, that's just how we feel. And I had to say, I'm going to listen to you and understand you, and also never, ever, ever be on your side of this.
Yeah.
But not get pissed off for you saying it, and like try to figure out a way then to like very slowly have the conversation with you of like why your example is different than mine.
Right. I feel like even like in relationships, like significant others, this could be really powerful. Like sometimes, especially like wounded kids, wounded inner children are like very egocentric thinking, and someone shares something and you just like fire back because you feel defensive because your inner child is like, so being able to like, again, step out and be like, I could see why someone might, why my partner might say that or think that or feel that. It's something that we don't do very well right now, especially with being so stuck in our emotional brains.
Yeah.
I'd love to see this concept become more of a thing, and it's a newer concept, I'm assuming, or it's not.
As far as I know, like because I like part of my work with this organization too was to research a ton of just like who's doing the work, like, what it looks like, how it's connected to other universities' research, stuff like that. And you see this, you really see it first starting to jump onto like the intellectual map in 2016. And it was all around the election. And then you see like it down, and then you see it kind of uptick, before this most recent, the Biden-Trump election. So yeah, so it looks like, I mean, I don't know, like I wonder if, like, part of my wondering always is like, were things this toxic during Obama and I just didn't care because I loved him so much that like I didn't pay as much attention? But for sure this concept has at least like seen more daylight since. I mean, there's been so many events in the past 4 or 5 years where it's like, wow,
right,
like these beliefs are killing people. They're getting so in the way of like a healthy society, like, so it's definitely more prevalent. And this is going to be like my only real plug today, which is that initially, Can We Talk, the events were at Penn, or we, like, Penn would travel to another college. Obviously this all went online during the pandemic. So right now we're doing about once a month, we do an event online through Zoom. Everybody's pretty much invited. You just register online. So if anybody wants to get more involved or just see what these conversations look like, it's called, I think if you were to Google Red and Blue Exchange or Can We Talk with UPenn or University of Pennsylvania, it'll come up. I think you'll put my contact information in the notes as well. But yeah, reach out. Anybody who's connected to academia, we would love to get more students, but also just more of anybody on board.
Okay. Yeah, I will make sure your email and your handles for any media are listed in the show notes so people can contact you if they want to explore that more and have questions, or just have questions in general. There may be some. Anything else you want to drop knowledge bombs about?
No, I don't think so. I think we did a good job today. This is
I
fun.
think so too, and I've kept you a little bit longer than I told you I would. So we will wrap up, and we will do so with the try it at home tip, which I always drop at the end of the session. I always feel like you all got a lot of tips though. Play, the mindfulness, the cognitive empathy. There's so many layers and levels of things that we went into. But you had shared with me this idea of being a feelings detective and not a judge. So your try it at home tip today is going to be that. And I'm going to let Matthew explain what exactly that is.
Yeah. So this I stole from Mark Brackett.
Okay.
who writes a great book on this. Do you know his book offhand?
I don't.
It's somewhere back here. I'll send it to you and we'll put it in the notes. But Mark Brackett was the first person I heard just using this terminology. And I now say it to a teacher or to a parent at least twice a week. And this includes my sister, who's a parent, and includes my mom, who's a grandparent to the same little boy. And it's basically just this idea of anytime anybody does something that you find weird or off-putting or annoying or whatever, instead of saying, why does he do that? That sucks. Say, why might this person be doing this? And like, how can I investigate it further in order to hopefully alleviate the situation?
Yeah.
So I think, again, going back to like a concept we used earlier, which is like nobody shows up trying to be bad at something.
Yep.
So if that's the case, what's triggering them to have an adverse reaction in any given situation? What's just, what's causing them to misalign with whatever the objectives are? And so like small example, we were with my nephew. We took a road trip this past summer. We were with my nephew. And what happened? I'm trying to think of a good example because we have so many. There were so many conversations where I just saw him being unnecessarily triggered.
Huh, okay.
So for example, we got to brunch, and before we even sat down, my sister said, "You're not having chocolate chip pancakes, okay?" And he he freaked out. He's 11 years old. Like, what is it? And I realized, like, hey, you just started that meal on a super negative note.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's triggered not by the pancakes, but by the delivery of. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the next time we sat, I said, hey, we're going to choose healthy options. And I'll give you a ton of those, but we're going to choose something healthy. Yeah. Because I had to ask at that point, what's wrong with chocolate chip pancakes? Oh, they're sugary. I was like, okay, so let's deliver that a little bit differently, because I'm on board. Nobody should start their day with chocolate and sugar, right? So the next time we sat down, I said, we're going to choose healthy options, and I'll give you like 5 really good ones to choose from. And that delivery didn't trigger him. He still didn't get the pancakes, right? Like at the end of the day, the objective was still met, which is that he didn't eat sugar that day. Yep. But this tiny change of delivery really changed it.
Yep.
And it took, not to toot my horn, but it took the detective to say, why is this kid pissed off?
Yeah.
Because their analysis, he's always mad. Every time we eat, he's mad.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. Nobody wants to just be mad every day at breakfast, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So look at the reactions, sit and really think why, from a cognitive and a non-cognitive empathy point, why is this person reacting this way? And then try to kind of work through it.
Yeah. Well, if I tie that back to cognitive empathy, I'm like, oh, these kind of interconnect a tiny little bit. And too, we school parenting, so much of our communication with kids is taking away their power and control. It doesn't always need to be that way. In fact, I coach a lot of parents on ways to communicate with kids that doesn't involve taking away control, because there are ways to get kids to do what you want or to not do the thing that you don't want them to do without being so direct and blunt and taking away their power and control, which can be really triggering. So I love that example. Yeah, there are ways to shift your language and shift your even body language and tone. That it's not always the message that's causing the problem. It's definitely how you deliver the message that is triggering. So I love that. So
I hear it a lot with teachers. Mm-hmm. My kids don't want to learn. And it's really, that's a judge.
Yeah, it's definitely a judge.
Right? A detective would say, I wonder why my kids don't want to learn.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, there's still a judgment. I'm not sure that they don't want to learn.
Yeah.
But at least if you wonder about it, you're getting that detective, hat on, right?
Yeah.
And that might change the way my kids don't want to learn is a super easy way to say, my work here is done.
Yeah.
And I wonder why that's a lift on you now. Figure out why that's the case, if that's the case.
Ooh, that was a good one. That's such a good one to end with. Be a detective, not a judge. And that will help you to shift your mindset and approach lots of people, all people, not even just kids, in a much better place. So that will be our try it at home tip. And that wraps us up for today's episode of Returning to Us podcast. If you would like me to answer a question of yours on a future episode, email me at podcast@thebehaviorhub.com, or you can send a text to 717-693-7744. And remember to lock in what you learned today by either leaving a review or a comment or something that lets me know what was your biggest takeaway, what are you going to try, what are you going to leave with, or come back and reflect on what you did do. And until next episode, I am Lauren Spiegelmeier, and thanks, Matthew, for joining us and sharing your genius.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
It was awesome.